just, well, okay, I'm cautiously optimistic. It didn't last time, so there is the presentation, and what we did 2 weeks ago was talk about the facts of the matter, money, sequencing, etc. And hopefully we answered any of your factual questions. What we didn't get to do was talk about qualitative ministry that a pipe organ provides. So we wanted to make space for this to be a forum of discussion now. You could have questions about facts. We'll try to answer them. You might also have a viewpoint where you want to say, hey, I'm very pro, I'm concerned about, I'm against. And this is your time to be able to say that cordially. And if you've got, again, questions, please ask them so we can get them answered. This can determine a lot that's helpful for our future. So the first speaker, because the organ committee's worked really hard on this, Garmin's going to speak to us about pipe organs in general and what he perceives to be how this can support ministry here, present and future, because that's a thing we don't get to talk about factually, right? I mean, that's a quality. So Garmin will speak to us about that, and then the floor will be open for anybody who wants to.
Garmin, go do this.
And if you're on Zoom and you want to speak, please do me the courtesy of just putting the hands up icon, and then whenever the current speaker's done, I'll call on you and we'll all hear you from this extra large television. But for now, I'm going to mute everybody that's on Zoom. Okay.
Morning. It's so good to see so many people here. I'm going to read because otherwise, if I don't, I have a memory like a sieve. As those who know me know, we've heard or we've read the facts, and I wanted to share again why I believe this to be a worthy and appropriate project for our parish. First of all, very generally, very broadly, corporate worship is an essential part of our Episcopal life and identity. Music and congregational singing in particular is an integral part of that worship. The preface to our 1982 hymnal states, and I read this to you a few years ago when we talked about the organ, and it states, from earliest times, the human race has expressed through music many of its deepest feelings, its jubilations, and such of its yearnings as can find only partial fulfillment in words. The books of the Old Testament record the voice of Israel in song. And according to the Gospels of Matthew and Mark, the Last Supper ended with a hymn. In this ancient tradition of liturgical song, which serves as the rootstock for the creation of a body of music through which Christians enter into ritual dialogue with their Creator. It is from the riches of this legacy that the Church offers music with which we can articulate our adoration, exaltation, and prayer to God. End quote. But why a pipe organ specifically, when a digital one is, at first glance, cheaper? Over the centuries, the pipe organ has emerged as the most eloquent, most efficient, and most powerful agent in leading human voices in song. Which is why, I'm sure, 2/3 of the Episcopal churches in the greater Houston area have pipe organs. And I suspect that many of those which don't have pipe organs prefer non-traditional worship style, which is not based on Western hymnody. It's no accident that our voices, which are driven by the breath of our bodies, are so well led by a pipe organ, which is real wind blowing through real pipes. Electronic or digital sound, while effective to a degree, is still merely a reproduction of real sound, as effective as a recording of a live ensemble is. Despite vastly sophisticated and high fidelity recording and playback systems, audiences still crave live music. On a more practical level, replacing our aging digital organ with the equivalent one would cost about 1/3 of the Kimball installation, approximately 200,000 or maybe a little more. Such a device would have a 30 to 50 year lifespan if we were lucky. Pipe organs last as long as or longer than buildings. The oldest known playable pipe organ was built in 1435. Yes, Mechanisms that control them need upgrades and overhauls, but the pipes that actually speak can last centuries. Something else in our favor is that we have the unusual luxury of enough structurally supported, acoustically appropriate attic and loft space to install a pipe organ. John spoke about that a couple of weeks ago. I also believe that having the Kimball will put St. Thomas in a strong position to attract well-qualified, experienced, talented, and dedicated music directors, organists, and musicians in the future. We also should not forget that while this approval process is the result of COVID delays and cost increases, parish did approve the project in principle before COVID on these price increases. Finally, I am a firm believer that Kimball 7133 came our way for a reason. I spoke about this particular instrument's uniqueness and history at the previous meeting 2 weeks ago, but here are the comments some others have made about our organ. Bob Simpson, who's the canon director of music at Christ Church Cathedral in Houston, said, "I'm so pleased to learn that St. Thomas has the sister instrument to the renowned Kimball organ at St. John's Cathedral in Denver, an instrument I know well. The W.W. Kimball Organ Company was a major American builder from the late 19th century to the outbreak of the Second World War. In that time, they built over or significantly renovated over 7,000 instruments for churches and civic auditoriums, from the Mormon Tabernacle to the Roxy Theater in New York City. Today, the few remaining well-maintained Kimballs are considered treasures. St. Thomas would join a small circle of churches with such an instrument. I truly believe that the vast majority of people would hear the dramatic and uplifting difference the Kimball organ makes in congregational singing, choir accompaniment, and solo repertoire. These organs were built to emphasize richness and a singing tone. The excellent acoustics at St. Thomas would only increase the beauty of this instrument." End quote. We're nearly there. Michael Barone, who is the producer and presenter of NPR's nationally syndicated pipe organ program, Pipe Dreams, said, "Kimballs are extraordinary. Nothing really touches them for opulence, like a great ocean swell, which could crush you, but doesn't." And then finally, from Dan Fenn, who was the dean of the Houston Galveston chapter of the American Guild of Organists. "An organ such as this, with its original pipework left in an unaltered state, is a rarity, not only in Houston, but nationwide. It will exponentially enhance your congregational singing, and it will be a tremendous tonal support as an accompanying instrument for choir and voice. We also look forward to partnering with you in the future in the hopes that we as a chapter could showcase the organ in an event." Thank you.
Garmin, can you stay? I have a question that came to me this week through email, and the question says, "Boy, this is a really big organ. Isn't it the sound gonna make us deaf?"
Well, first of all, the size of the organ really determines the amount of variety of sounds that it can produce. An organ is sort of like an orchestra, so it's got a whole lot of variety of sounds. Many of them, the largest, the sort of swell of the ocean is, I would say, equivalent to the kind of volumes that we can get on our present organ, although they are acoustic, so they're very real in the room. Those bass notes can actually kind of shake the room. But on the other hand, also, we get a tremendous variety of orchestral sounds. It's like an orchestra. You have sort of stops which you pull out, which imitate different parts of the orchestra. In phase one, we won't have as many of those variety of imitation stops. Those will eventually come, and those really contribute towards the versatility of the player who is accompanying the choir or the congregation. Secondly, the organ, although there are a lot of pipes in there, will be behind louvered shades, which are controllable by foot pedals, so the volume is infinitely gradable, so to say. So it's not, I mean, there are many churches which have many more pipes in smaller spaces.
Thank you.
But the acoustics of our present sanctuary or our present nave will support it.
They will,
Yeah,
and,
I mean,
and they're particularly suitable.
Divider's piece will shake the very pews that we sit in, I assume.
I wouldn't say that, but I mean, it'll have a very strong presence.
Okay.
And maybe it's worth reminding us that we did the floors ahead of the organ, not because they were more important, but because there was nobody building during COVID. And frankly, we had to do the floors before doing anything with an organ because the dust stirred from pulling the carpet would have required us to do something with the pipes we didn't want to have to do. And a part of what that floor does, I hope you felt it since being here, is it makes the acoustics much more live, even when somebody's speaking. And we did the new speakers to help make sure sound is intelligible. As always, we have to titrate that because many people use it and sometimes they turn knobs, right? But I hope that you're finding sound intelligible and also enjoying some more of the liveness of the sound from a hard floor. And that was all intentional with the organ project in mind. So now the floor is open. And we've got experts in the room who can answer questions if you have them, or again, feel free to speak. Hey, I want this, I don't want this, or I'm confused. Please, CJ.
Can I just ask one question about finances, and that is, you sent out a very detailed list of the things. Has anything changed since then, or is that the basic?
No, nothing's changed. I guess the only thing that's changed is a few people have said, hey, we're going to extend our pledge for 6 years. Some people have already said that because we really want to do this. In fact, even a check came in this week for a 6th year of capital pledge to support the installation of this, right? As a gesture of faith.
But the basic costs haven't.
No change in costs at all, not since 2 weeks ago. No. Yes, sir.
Let me talk to that for just a minute.
Please.
Some of the costs that you saw are still up in the air. By that, what I mean is until we have, we sign a contract, let's say, with the organ builder, we won't know exactly what his costs are going to be, but they're pretty close.
That is to say, we had firm quotes and we've adjusted them more than we think they should be to create a margin of error. So those numbers include a margin of error as much sometimes as 20%, right?
So I wasn't here for the first meeting. I have no idea.
John, would you speak to the cost one more time?
Sure.
And by the way, if you want the slide presentation, you'll find it in the e-news, which guides you through, and that'll be in this week's as well. It's a PowerPoint presentation, and particularly as you wipe to the end, you'll see all of the figures financially in a really easy to read, hopefully.
Can you repeat the question?
The question was, hey, I wasn't here at the first meeting. Can you remind us of the costs?
Larry? Does anybody else need to see the? If not, I'll get with you and go over the costs in detail. How's that?
Okay.
Can I say something?
Please, Kathy,
Can I go say?
go where you like. Yeah.
The fact that we were having 2 meetings on this kind of scared me. I thought we got this already planned out 5 years ago. And so when I heard that we were doing this, I thought, oh no, there are people who don't want an organ, a real organ, a pipe organ, not an appliance like a computer that we have right now. The last church that I was in, Ascension in Houston, had what was called the Little Gem. We had a pipe organ. We had 6 years of music months. We had organists come from New York, from Los Angeles, from Washington, from the UK, because they wanted to play this organ, which was nothing like the one that we have here, stuck in boxes in the attic. This organ is very special. We're the only church in Texas that has this historical organ. When I look at this room, I have to say it, and I'm over 70, so I'm allowed to say it too. This organ isn't just for us. This organ is for the future of St. Thomas the Apostle in Nassau Bay. This organ will put, you don't want to say a church is on the map. I don't mean it like that. But do you want to be known for your beautiful floors or the nice toilets or the fact we give out donuts free? It would be really, really good. We've got NASA at the end of this street. This area is famous for being really, really good at doing new and wonderful and adventurous things. Let's drop the ball. What are we going to do? Give it away to somebody else because we can't do it? We can do it. It's just something else that's on the plan that we can make happen. We don't have to have spaghetti suppers or, heaven forbid, other stuff that I've done in the past. But we can do this because this will actually be the best part. I have to say, rectors come and go. Pipe organs don't go anywhere. It would be something that we can put as a future for our grandchildren. They may not understand now that this is an important part of the Episcopal Church, the Anglican Church, the churches that I grew up in, Llandaff Cathedral with this vast organ, or going to any of the abbeys in the UK and hearing this. They can play so softly, it'll make you cry. They can play with such energy and with such exuberance and with such pride that the floor shudders. And you know you are in a worshipful space. I love the church because of its music. My husband, who doesn't go to church, will say she only goes because they let her sing. Not quite, but you're on a pathway there to something. The sound of a pipe organ of this caliber will lift your hearts. It will make you understand why you are kneeling. It will make you sing better. It'll certainly make us sing better. And what we've got now isn't an organ. Yes, it's a thing. You know, it's got people. Listen to Ben playing the organ, listen to Garman, he's the organist, but it's not the same thing. This pipe organ can do anything. It's a whole orchestra. We used to at Ascension, because they're on wheels, you can move the console out. We used to put the console in the middle of the church to have a concert, and children would come very close to it because they wanted to watch the organist's feet dance across the pedals. One time we had a husband and wife team, and I can't remember where they came from. They're probably terribly famous. And people were laughing and crying because they were so good. Those concerts were open to the public. They were free. There was a little basket into which you could put your $1 or your $100. It didn't matter. But we had busloads of people from assisted living. There were people who looked forward to coming to hear a free concert. So we've got it already. I know it's going to take, what, 2 years to get it all done? We've got longer than that. Come on, we can put that. Let's not box it up and give it away, because that would be a crying shame.
Lila, I think I saw your hand next.
Kathy's so eloquent and put my thoughts so beautifully said, and I just want to say hello, everyone. And I enjoy the shade of trees that my mother planted as sacrifice. And it is a beautiful legacy. Students and professional organists will come to play this organ. When I was at Rice in the chapel, the organ was scheduled 24/7. You could go in and sit and just listen. It's amazing. Music may be my first language, and it moves my soul in prayer. So I am delighted that we have this organ, and it just makes me feel more fun.
David, please.
I'd like to see us talk a little bit more about money. And this project started in 2016. And the project was to install a lovely organ at the cost of about $50,000 to $70,000. That's not where we are today. This lovely organ has needed to be rebuilt. So when I hear everybody talk about the longevity of organs, that has been the problem. Why this $60,000 project has gone to $600,000. And the basic number I would like to see us concentrate on at the moment is $500,000. Give or take a little. We need to spend around $500,000 to get this instrument installed and completed. If we don't do the full organ, a little under $500,000. If we do the full organ, a little over $500,000. The full organ will cost over $600,000. We've already spent $100,000. And so the question I think before us as a parish, as a church, is this the sort of money we should be spending on ourselves as luxuries? Thank you.
Bill?
Well, I'm sure the committee has considered the various financial aspects of this project. And David's right, it's a $600,000 project. I am wondering if they've considered such things as participation by some area churches on a subscription basis, for example, where they would have some use of the organ, albeit the may if they wish, but certainly some use of the organ. The organ will certainly be a teaching vehicle, although it's limited because there's only one. But it will entail a brand new ministry of significance beyond the construction of the organ itself, which will entail it will entail the organ master, it will entail a number of things. So we have to get over the first hurdle, obviously, but there are more hurdles to come, which I think may be of a lesser magnitude financially, but they nonetheless will be there. But I would say again that participation by other churches in some form or fashion in the cost of this organ is something to be looked into. Maybe totally impractical, but on the other hand, it may be something that they might embrace.
Did everybody hear that? Okay. What Phil said is he wondered if the organ committee had considered essentially involving other area churches in the organ, both after it's installed as a teaching instrument, but also as sort of a subscription so that other people can be pulled in to help support it financially. Is that a good summary? And also keep in mind that we're waiting to write grants until we have, yes, we're going to do this, right? So we haven't counted out grant sources. What we've said is we're not going to get a grant until we show that we're committed, right? So keep in mind, there's many different ways of considering partnership and funding, but I do want you to know, I hope this is okay. In our convocation, we're one of the 2 healthiest parishes that there are. And maybe you don't know that Texas City can no longer afford their building or a priest. Maybe you don't know that Holy Trinity in Dickinson can no longer afford a full-time priest. Maybe you don't know All Saints in Hitchcock has 6 members.
Yeah.
Maybe you don't know that our friends at Good Shepherd are right on the line fiscally. Now, and you're going to see this next week, right? We pass deficit budgets. They don't end up being deficit, but we're on the line down here. You just need to know that. Down here south of the Beltway, we're on the line and we're one of the 2 strong ones. You just need to know that. So I just want you to know, I don't know that other churches are in a position to support this because they're fighting to stay open. That's not a counterpoint, Phil, at all. Because as you say, there's an opportunity for the organ to be used for teaching purposes by other members of the convocation for conferences. But I do want to say it seems unlikely that other places are in a position to do a subscription. Does that make sense? And maybe I just gave you a point about the convocation. you aren't willing to hear or ready to hear, but it's the case. Please, Kathy.
I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you're just talking about Episcopal church.
I am only talking about Episcopal
I think
churches.
there's a whole, like one right next door that might want to use the organ. I don't know what kind of organ they have. But I wouldn't, to me, what you're saying involves maybe other types of congregations.
Yeah, thank you. Linda, please.
I don't know anything about organist music. I was told not to sing.
Could you stand up?
I can project.
Oh, yes.
There you
I was saying, I don't know very much about anything with music, but my question, and I hear everybody's comments about other people using it, they would have to come use our facility. Would they pay us to do this? Is my question. Are we gonna run our air conditioning and say, come on over here and use the organ, or do we ask them to rent the space? That's the other way you're gonna get supporting funds. And then that doesn't seem like a very Christian thing to do, to say, you know, you need to rent our space, because we use it for all sorts of stuff for free all the time, and we're paying all these things of it. Also, the wonderful comment that all these organists from all over the United States might want to come here and use it or do it. Are we paying them if they come here? Or are they gonna do a free concert? They're gonna fly in here by themselves? I don't know how that would happen, and we're talking years down the road, and if this happened. We can't afford to do some of our own projects around here. I'm not saying I wouldn't be in support of this idea, but just think long-term. Also, are the children that we have in our schools, I mean, and in our congregation now, gonna still be in this congregation and supporting the funding and keeping this church alive? We're having a hard time keeping our school open. And that's supposed to be our #1 outreach. Now we're talking about an organ supposed to be our #1 outreach. I'm confused as to where our priority really is.
It says Bob and then Tom, just because that's the order I saw you. Is that okay?
I'm a relative newcomer to this congregation, and one of the things that drew me to it was the quality of the music program. And I was very excited to find that you had this instrument ready to be installed, and I contributed money to the installation of that particular instrument. And I'm sure that over the years, there are many other people in this congregation that have given money for the purpose of installing that particular instrument. If a vote is taken to abandon the project and to go with an electronic instrument, or what one of my organist friends call appliances, you have to think about whether that's a violation of the trust of people that contributed money for that particular purpose, and how you will reconcile the financial contribution they made under those terms, which would be violated if the project were dropped.
Tom, please.
So I want to address the money question, because it was brought up, and it was a good one. And so I will first start, well, I'm on the committee, by the way. Start with that. I will first start with, I agree that it was very disappointing that the original price that was stated was between 50 and 75,000. That was very disappointing to me when we started seeing what the real costs were. I will also want to say that the numbers that you talked about, the $600,000, are true. However, we're not talking about coming together for $600,000 right now. We're talking about a delta between what's been pledged and what we need to finish the project. So people have already pledged. I'm sorry, I forget what the delta is we're looking at right now. I think it's 150,000.
I mean, how much pledge is left that hasn't been received?
No, I mean that we know what our pledge is, but there's a delta that.
About 95.
How much to cover the?
Oh, yeah, we would need another 95,000 if everyone keeps their pledge,
Right.
another 95 past the pledge mark to get it installed at the lower
And
level.
then 75 past that, so $165,000.
If we keep our pledge,
If we keep our
Yes.
pledge
We
and
keep 90% of our pledge.
okay, 90% of our.
90%.
So I think it's very important to know that we're not talking about $600,000 today. the reason we're here is because the costs have gone up. And what we're talking about is that delta. So to get the 3 rooms installed, it's $95,000 over what people have already committed to. And I think it's important to say that, because if it was $600,000, I think it's a different discussion. And I really think that needs to be said, so everybody understands, that's what we're talking about, the difference today. We're not talking about starting all over 5 years ago and people recommitting to new pledges and anything like that. People have pledged, and there'll be more pledging going on, by the way. I know that, because when we commit to this, we're going to do this. I love what Kathy said about us being very, we were founded by members of the people who started Johnson Space Center. We do great things in this community, and we always have. So I love that that was mentioned, because I really think this is about leadership and not fear of the future, but going into the future.
I'm going to read a comment in the chat from Zach. I like to think of St. Thomas not only as a building to first and foremost receive the Holy Eucharist and Word of God, but also a hub for fine arts in the Southeast Houston area, whether it's art on display by regional artists, icons and workshops on display, Houston Symphony League Bay Area giving concerts, and hopefully a world-class work of living art, providing concerts that would not be otherwise available to our area demographic. Thanks, Zach. And then Alan Hill had a question. Can someone comment on the annual maintenance cost for the new organ? And we did get to hear that 2 weeks ago, but it's good to throw that back. Garmin, would you speak to that?
Yeah, if I can remember. The organ will need to be tuned, have a sort of full tuning at least once a year. Just worth noting that the room temperature needs to be at a certain, at the Sunday temperature when the organ's tuned, but during the week, the temperature can go down to whatever it sort of would be when there's nobody there. That will affect the tuning, but only when there's nobody there. So that's a new sort of development in organ tuning, as far as I understand. So it doesn't have to be kept temperature controlled the whole time. And it's, I would say, probably, I think for tuning is probably about $500. And a full tuning probably at least once a year, and then maybe a touch-up tuning to certain parts, maybe before Christmas and Easter. Major overhauls, such as what is being done at the moment, occur depending on what needs to be restored. There's sort of leather mechanisms in there, there's tubing, there's electronics, happen sort of every 50 years, every sort of maybe 80 years for some for some things. And they sort of rotate. So it takes the sort of actual mechanism, parts of it will need to be done, from time to time on a relatively long sort of time basis.
It may be helpful to hear, at least in my recollection, the history of the money. Would this be helpful?
Yeah.
And because initially when we had a meeting, we were thrown a number of around $70,000 with a lot of confidence by somebody who was not on the organ committee. It was really important to hear. That number came out, but our organ builder did not consent to it. And this is a little bit of, I think, what's hamstrung the project a little bit. We received this organ as a gift, so we paid no money for it. And when people have asked, well, why did the cost increase? It's because we have to rewire the instrument. The wiring was not the code. And because it costs more money to put a sprinkler suppression system and build chambers, right? That wasn't factored into that first 70 that was thrown out with confidence by somebody who was not on the organ committee. Now, there's no rewinding that, but it's just good to hear from the beginning a number was given to us by somebody not on the committee that seemed overly optimistic, because there was. And that's resulted in a lot of people saying, you don't know how to run the project. But I want you to hear that the committee did not produce that number. And it has been like, well, it's been in our heads, right? Because that was the initial presentation. If you'll remember, within a couple of months, we did the intel, we checked it out, and no, it was going to be more like 275 at the minimum, 275 at the minimum. And we came back with that. And that the full organ would be more like 425. Now you may say, well, how did it go from 425 to now the 600 mark to do the full install? Well, we had 5 years. And as you know, material costs did not go with inflation. They went at like 30% or 50% above. So that's a little bit of how we found ourselves at what seems to be an inflated number. But a reminder that that initial 70 was not realistic or part of our organ team. I mean, what's done is done, but I do want to dispel that number. It didn't come out of our work. Yes, sir.
Well, I think it would be helpful. We've heard a lot of numbers, 600, 200, 175, 70. It would be very helpful for the committee to give us, albeit pie in the sky kind of projections, but to give us a time-sensitive budget.
Yeah.
So that we can look at what we're really going to be faced with. I've not heard anybody say what the amount of the existing pledges are, which is a very significant factor. And I'm sure there are other financial considerations also. But something in the way of a time-sensitive budget of what we will need to raise by the next meeting if we're going to vote on this.
Yeah.
To
Hey,
give us a consensus.
it's a great question. And again, the presentation with all the digits is in the e-news, but I can go over those numbers if you'll allow me to give you softer numbers. When I say softer, I mean within 10,000. Is that okay? So here's where we stand today. We have approximately, and here approximate, right? But I'm within spitting distance when I give you these numbers. $60,000 in the restricted organ fund. That means that money can only be spent on the pipe organ unless the donor says you can spend it on something else, okay? We have about $70,000 in the designated capital funds account. Designated means the vestry has direction of it. This is our third point in our 5-year capital drive. Installation of the pipe organ. So the assumption is you can add those numbers together, you're at 130, right? So that's cash on hand today. You heard John say that if we look at outstanding pledges and we only count on 90% of them, we should expect about $200,000 more to come into the designated capital funds account by the end of this year. Again, that's assuming 90% of people keep their pledge, or even if they dial it down, that we get 90%. So then the delta, if that all came in, is $95,000 to install 3/5 of the organ, build the chambers, and then another 75 beyond that to install the last 2/5, right? So again, the reason we're having these meetings is to present you with these numbers and say, hey, we've got 130 on hand, should be collecting 200 more, and that would make us 95 or 175 short of the delta. If we approve to go through with this, we can also write grants to help capture some of that. Again, I'm just summarizing the presentation from last time as best I can. In terms of time scale, we're not spending money we don't have. The first element was get rid of our debt, and we did. Thank you, by the way. It's so nice not to pay $40,000 in debt service a year. So we won't be borrowing any money. And then what that means is if we proceed, we'll do elements of the organ when cash is on hand. So if we were to say at the annual meeting, we want to do this, the first thing we would do is build the chambers and have the louvers refinished so that they're all installed, ready to start laying pipe. As money comes in after that, well, we'll start laying pipe. And there is one last expenditure on the reservoirs, and then there's a new blower. And obviously we'll have to buy those components. So the time scale is as long as it takes to get the money in hand through our contributions, any fundraising strategies or grants that may arise. I hope that makes sense. Now, if we were to say, if the money all came in and we were able to raise the other 95,000 delta by the end of next year, then it would take one additional year to get it installed and playable. Does that make sense? So after we build the chambers and have money on hand, it takes 6 months to get the pipes laid for the 3/5 configuration. I mean, approximately, right? So those are the kind of the ballparky numbers. They're pretty reliable, except it's 206,000, not 200. If that makes sense, you'll find all the exact numbers in the presentation, but those are the round ones. Kathy.
So I've talked to one person who says she has the grant written, ready to send, but I don't really know much about grants. I don't have any idea how large grants usually are. Do you have any idea, like what kind of money we might be looking at for a grant?
You know, all over the place. The Hertzstein Foundation will give $200,000 in a single grant. Will they give it to us? I mean, we don't know, right? I mean, this isn't like the lottery where, you know, your chances are the same whether you buy a ticket or not. It's not like that. But how can you count on a grant? It's a strategy, other people get them. We think we've got a good case as a committee if we go forward, because this would be one of 4 publicly playable Kimballs in the United States. One of 4.
Yeah.
Right, so that's something, right? That's a differentiator, but we don't know. Kathy Delgado and Lewis wrote a comment. If we scrap the Kimball and go with another electronic organ that costs $220,000, whereas we need another 95 above what's pledged to continue with the Kimball, isn't that correct? Well, it is. And it is a good reminder when we talk about monies, right? If we were, and Bob said this, if we were to say we don't want to proceed with the pipe organ, the vestry has already said, if donors say, I want my pipe organ contribution back, we'll return it to you, right? Which would, at worst, pull 60,000 out of the monies we have on hand toward an organ. So we would need to raise another 150 to get a digital, which would pretty much be the pledge balance. Does that make sense? Some people have said, well, the one we have works fine. Well, it doesn't work fine. It turns out it's towards the end of its 30-some year lifespan. Now, we can get a few more years out of it because we've got good enough organists who can work with keys that don't work. And we have keys that don't work already. You probably don't notice them. But we just need to know what the alternatives are. And of course, how do you calculate what people want to do with their money? We don't know. This is why we're doing this at the annual meeting, because it's your money. Yes, ma'am.
We can get publicity regarding this Kimball pipe organ if we say that we're going to do it. I mean, as you know, I'm a retired journalist. People like stories, especially now when everything's gone to hell in a handbasket. They want nice stories about good things that people are doing. And we already have stories written about us locally, about being a church of outreach, about giving to the hungry. All right, so we can write stories about giving to the musical hungry. I mean, there are different ways of getting to people. And we need the publicity, but people will not give us a grant until we say that we will give the money, because it's just like annual giving at the school. Unless you get all the parents saying, yes, we will give $5. You can't get anything from other people because the lack of commitment shows a lack of energy, and therefore they won't give. But they will give if we give.
Thank you. I saw Frank.
Here's a challenge to you and to the vestry, I think. And you said it just a minute ago, that you pass deficit spending. Quit doing that.
I wish we could, Frank.
Who do we give our contribution to? The $60,000 that's short of the budget, or do we give it to the organ?
Yeah, Frank makes a great point, and I will speak to it next week when you look at the budget. Now, it is helpful to remind, we've passed deficit budgets and not had deficit years.
Yeah.
The reason we pass a deficit budget is, and you'll hear me speak to this next week, or Mike Keener, we give you what we consider the most conservative estimates of plate offerings and pledges. This year, we were projected to have a $40,000 loss. We ended up with a $20,000 in the black year. Now, will that happen? I mean, we don't know because it wasn't pledged. but it came in through plate or people participated beyond that. How do we pass a balanced budget? I leave and you don't have a priest. No, I'm not being funny. What we spend here is to keep what we have. The lawn cost is what it costs. We can't make somebody do it for less money. We gotta mow the grass. Or Nassau Bay. Yeah, if you live here, you know about the HOA. So we got to do that. I mean, look, our program staff, I don't know if you know this, none of us does our job. We do 7/5 of our job, right? I was mopping the toilets last night because we don't have a janitor who is here on call, right? I don't mind doing that. Like, we all pitch in, but you got a staff that works really hard. I don't know who we can cut. But that's the only thing we can cut is staff. We can't cut our light bill. We can't cut our air conditioning bill. We can't cut our grass bill. Now, you could find a priest that will do this for less money. You probably can, but I'm not doing it for less. I'm not, because that's what you promised me when I came here from California.
We'll pass your budget next week.
And Frank, I'm not complaining. I'm not complaining. What I'm saying is nobody likes to have an imbalanced budget. Nobody does. And we haven't come up short for 7 years. We haven't come up short. We've come up in the black or we've slid in even. I don't know how long that'll continue.
Talking about 3 weeks ago, $60,000 short.
It's 40. It's 40. I'll tell you why it's 40 if you want. Somebody at the end,
A whole lot different than 60.
it's much better. Well, at the end of the year, we got a contribution from somebody that wasn't pledged for about 20, and that person has set up an automatic payment plan. Beyond them, we did receive a couple more pledges. So what did we do with that 20 that's automatic? We made it 10. Because it didn't come with a pledge, we cut it in half, even though it's auto scheduled and we know that. Conservative numbers is what we try to give you. And where the other 10 came from, it came from people who turned in their pledge card, well, later than the rest of us did, and they still did. So you'll see that reflected in the budget. And just so you can check it in your e-news, you'll see the 2022 budget, the 2022 actual, and the 2023 budget all side by side in 3 columns. But Frank, I wish, even conservatively, we came out even. I mean, I wish that. I don't know how to do it. Yes, sir, Bob.
In terms of money, I think it's worth reemphasizing and reminding ourselves of what Garmin said. That if you go with an electronic instrument in 25 or 50 years, because that's about the lifetime, you're gonna have to go through this whole thing again. The Kimball goes in, it's there in perpetuity.
Yeah.
It's really wonderful to hear all of these comments from all sorts of different directions, and they're things that we've heard before, and I've heard in my previous parish as well. I'm a musician, so I think like that, and I think what I'd like, and I'm not very articulate about this, but this makes me think of some of the great cathedrals in this country and of Europe. One of them started just before the Depression and still not finished, where and never will be finished, where the architects and the builders begun something which they knew they would never see the end of. And they knew that it was probably beyond their means. And I'm not saying that I love that this world needs responsible people, because I'm not one physically. and we really need people like me. But what these people did is build things which down the ages have created works of such beauty that have inspired and nourished generations spiritually, beyond what they ever could have imagined. And I'm not just being all kind of pie in the sky. And we've heard about how music changes our lives through liturgy, which changes our lives to go out and do what we are being challenged to do. I also remember the previous presiding bishop saying that the church is the only sort of major organization which exists for the benefit of its non-members. And so I think one of the great things that Mike has done here is bring people in through all sorts of things, whether it's the scouts, whether it's the art, whether it's artists through commissioning things. And I see this as being another extension of that as well. And I, in addition to Bob's comment about, you know, if we kick the can down the road by bringing another digital organ, I think that's not going to really solve anything. I think, you know, if we can dream big beyond the present, I think we would be doing something, a beautiful thing for the future, in equipping us to really connect to the Creator in ways beyond which we can do in ordinary life and through years. Thank you.
Polly, please.
If we do not install, we play the one we have until it dies. We have to buy a new organ then. We have to raise money for that, right?
Yeah, so Polly's question is, if we don't install the Kimball, the presumption is we'll play the digital organ we have till it dies or gets close to death, right? Like it's on clear hospice. It's already on hospice. But as you know, hospice can last up to 2 years. I don't know if you know that, but it can. Then we would have to raise money for the other. And so yes, that is somewhat the case, although I could also say that if people kept their capital pledge, then there would be that pool of designated money, not restricted, that the vestry could direct toward it. But that's if people keep their, assuming people keep their pledge.
My point is, you're gonna lose more money by not installing the organ, because the remaining price of what has to be paid is less than the price of a digital organ, right?
There are a few ways to think about it, and that is one way. That is one way. Although I would say, objectively, somebody could say, well, if people kept their pledge, we could just buy a new digital organ and we wouldn't have to raise any more money. James?
I'm not giving money so that I can buy a ticket to the maiden voyage of this organ. I'm not giving money so that I can hear the first concert this organ plays in this building. I expect to be here 5 years from now. I don't expect to be here 50 years from now. I expect this Kimball organ to be here 50 years from now. I expect that it will work 50 years from now. Probably nobody in this room will be here 50 years from now. But smart money does not bet that way. Okay, will this still be an active parish 50 years from now?
Oh, yeah.
None of us can guarantee that.
Yeah.
But Texas City Parish, the Hitchcock Parish, we don't know if they'll be there next year. But I expect this one to be here next year and 5 years from now and 50 years from now. And I expect the Kimball organ to be played 50 years from now, and I won't hear a note of it.
Okay, now I'm gonna do what I do. I'm gonna preach. And this is not, listen, somebody asked me, why aren't you pushing this project? And that's because I'm not leaving you all over a musical instrument. And a musical instrument will not define our community with me as your priest. It is a thing, and it can be a lovely thing, but we are more than anything here at St. Thomas. And I hope we all agree on that, right? And the important thing for us, we may not agree on this, but I hope we can agree our church is more important than anything, no matter how lovely that thing might be. Now, if not, we got bigger problems. Please hear that. So somebody came to me 3 weeks ago and said, I'm really worried this will be divisive And my immediate reply is, it will only be divisive if we make it divisive. Please don't. Vote your conscience before God. And after we voted, we did. And I hope nobody will say, I didn't get my way, so I'm done. Because frankly, that's the world we live in, not the world God imagines for us. It is okay if we disagree. As your priest, it's okay if we disagree, but it is not okay, my opinion, that we treat each other poorly, that we take our toys and go home. That's the problem with American politics. Sorry, I'm preaching politics because the system's broken and we cannot be broken people. We're supposed to be the balm in Gilead. When there's a disagreement, we respect each other and we come back together. And I hope that is the spirit in which you will cast your vote next week. I will see you then. Thank you all for coming.